Library. Welcome to the Clements Bookworm. This is our 53rd episode. If you are joining us for the first time, I just want to point out a couple of the ways that we use Zoom. Please feel free to chime in the chat. We like the idea of this being some building community and feeling interactive. However, so that your questions don't get lost, put those in the Q&A section. Then you can also see the questions other people are asking, and you can give them a thumbs up, and that will reorder the questions so that we know which ones people most want answered. We do have the live transcript turned on today. This is a machine caption transcript. You can toggle it on or off and change the size. And I also have side-by-side mode enabled, which should allow you to see both the slides and the speaker. And you can change the relative size of what you're seeing by moving the separator. I can only control so much of what you see, so please play around with your screen a little bit if you need to get it just right. This program is brought to you by the William L. Clements Library. The Clements Library's mission is to collect, preserve, share, and promote the study and discussion of primary sources related to all aspects of history and culture of North America and the Caribbean up to about 1900. So, as a descendant of the Saginaw Chippewa tribe, I also think it's really important for us to acknowledge that the University of Michigan is located on the territory of the Anishinaabe people. In 1817, the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations made the largest single land donation to the University of Michigan, offered ceremonially as a gift in the text of the Treaty of the Foot of the Rapids, so that their children could be educated in a Western manner. We acknowledge the history of Native displacement that allowed the University of Michigan to be founded, and today we reaffirm contemporary and ancestral Anishinaabe ties to this land and their profound contributions to this institution. In addition, the William L. Clements Library acknowledges that it has and continues to benefit from the original land dispossession and established hierarchies of settler colonialism. Okay, if you've had a chance to vote, and if you haven't had a chance, click very quickly, and I will share the results of the poll question, and let's see how we did. Oops. Why didn't it give me the chance to share it? Well, oh, there we go. It just took it a second. All right. This was a tricky one. So which of the buildings was not designed by Albert Kahn? And it is actually the Rackham Graduate School. So we can talk more about that, or if I'm not sure if people have questions at some point about all of this, but of course, some of these buildings weren't named the way they are named now when they were first created either. So there's a history there along the way too. But thank you for participating in the poll, and we'll talk more about Albert Kahn in a moment. Today's episode is generously sponsored by Tony Morell in honor of Corey Bell Root. So thank you so much for that sponsorship and for your participation in this program. We really appreciate it. I'm thrilled today to welcome Albert Kahn's granddaughter, Carol Kahn, and her good friend and author, Michael Hodges, to the program. Carol is a retired nurse and spends her free time uncovering her family history while visiting Kahn design buildings all over the country. And In addition, the Albert Kahn family papers were donated by Carol and cataloged by archivist Sally Bund, and they reside at the Bentley Historical Library on campus. As she goes around looking for more information, she discovers Kahn materials in all sorts of unlikely places. And I love this photo because it's showing the visit to the University of Michigan Museum of Art to view the Albert Kahn sketch collection. Michael Hodges was the fine arts writer for the Detroit News for over 30 years and is now retired. His career in journalism also included positions in Boston and Venezuela, and as a feature writer for the New York Post. He has received wide acclaim for his article on Detroit architecture and the resurgence of Detroit. His book on Kahn, Building the Modern World, won the 2018 State History Award in the Books, University and Commercial Press category, and the 2019 Midwest Book Award in the Biography category. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for being here today. So Michael, I'm thinking that we should start the conversation by talking a little bit about the importance of Kahn's work and the methods that he used in his architecture.
So I have this quick 5-point checklist of why Kahn matters as an architect. He's principally known as an industrial architect. He built almost all the Ford factories and many of the other car company factories. His 1905 building number 10 at the Packard motor car plant on the far east side of Detroit was revolutionary in its use of reinforced concrete, which made the building stronger, fireproof, and allowed for enormous windows because the concrete frame holds the building up rather than the walls. He also designed the Highland Park plant in 1910 on Woodward Avenue and the Rouge complex starting around 1918 for Ford Motor. His early auto plants, in particular Packard Building Number 10 and Highland Park, became an inspiration to young, radical modernist architects in Europe. In particular, Walter Gropius, who had a picture of Highland Park in his studio, and Le Corbusier. And many people draw a straight line from Albert Kahn's auto factories to the creation of the international style. Albert Kahn also built most of what we consider old Detroit, the Fisher Building, Detroit Athletic Club, Detroit News Building, Free Press Building, as well as most of the older parts of the University of Michigan. One of the most interesting things I think about Albert Kahn is in the late 1920s, he was hired by the Kremlin to design the industrialization of the Soviet Union. And Kahn Associates ended up building about 500, designing and ultimately building about 500 factories across the USSR, which quite by accident ended up being one of the reasons why the Nazis were not able to conquer the Soviets, because the Soviets could produce their own tanks and munitions, et cetera, thanks to Albert Kahn. And in one of my favorite little footnotes, Albert Kahn may have also played a key role in stiffening Edsel Ford's spine when the Diego Rivera Detroit industry murals at the Detroit Institute of Arts came under right-wing and religious attack in 1933. So it's quite a record.
That is quite a record. And I love that you're able to give it to us so succinctly. So that really sets the stage well. I know that you started to mention the reinforced concrete, and I know that both you and Carol have some information about that. So I'm not sure, maybe Carol, if you want to talk a little bit about the family history.
little bit on the family history. This wasn't just about Albert Kahn. This was an entire, excuse me, thank you so much for this opportunity to everybody involved who's put this together. I should start with that. This wasn't just about Albert Kahn. This included Julius Kahn, his brother, who he sent to college to University of Michigan, who then developed a system of reinforced concrete that was very, very successful in the development of these buildings. But in the family, the sister Molly Kahn Fuchs, she helped her brother late at night mixing this concrete in steel in a home that they had until they finally got the mixture and the development of the bar, the Kahn bar, exactly right, and a patent was developed. That helped raise the family out of poverty. Molly also helped develop a whole system of multicolor blueprinting system that went on to be a business that allowed for blueprinting and allowed for continuing architectural progress. So it was a family, an incredible family. One of the brothers went out west to work on the Hoover Dam. That would be Felix. Moritz helped with the development of the Soviet Union. He was the businessman there doing all the contracts and negotiation. So it's an amazing family. The mother sent Albert to drawing school with Julius Melchers, and that was the beginning of the whole thing. And the whole progress. And then he ended up winning, Albert won a scholarship to work in Europe for about a year and made numerous sketches, ended up bringing back the architecture of Europe, Italy, France, to the United States.
And those are the sketches
in the Art Museum.
Yeah,
That was a nice photo. You can go there to see those. You just have to make an appointment and they will set out. Those are actually online where you can see them in small form at the University of Michigan Art Museum.
I just love how creative the family is, and it's, I think it's good to recognize too that there were multiple members taking part in these creations. So Michael, do you want to talk a little bit more about the engineering building?
Yeah, the engineering building, which is built in 1903, is one of the first applications of Julius Kahn's system for reinforced concrete. So it's the first reinforced concrete building at the university. Aesthetically, I would say it's an okay building. It's a little odd looking. The little Baroque towers are kind of cute, poking up above the roof line. But what I particularly love about the building is the arch, because the arch ends up becoming one of the defining elements of going to the University of Michigan. It's what I like to call an iconic architectural element. It's something that graduates will always remember, and it has a certain power in the way that architectural compression sometimes has.
Someone told me, I don't remember who, that students got engaged there, that it's a place, Anne told me this, students get engaged there. I love that building because I used to walk through campus as a kid, not really understanding any of the history. And if you sneak upstairs, there's a library upstairs of Native American books, and that belonged to my piano teacher's husband that he had collected. So I love going up there to see that. It's a wonderful building.
Yes, yeah, the arch is definitely an iconic feature. Even now, sometimes I will go out of my way to walk through the arch.
Makes sense.
The building also had, I'm not sure if it's still there, but it had an enormous pool for the naval engineering program, so that they could build models and see how they worked in actual water conditions.
Right. And so that's the only part of engineering that's still in the building because of that.
Okay.
Yeah, I see all sorts of great memories in the chat, and somebody's mentioning that in the 60s it was packed with snow after a snowstorm. And that sounds amazing.
That would take a lot of snow. That's great.
Oh, goodness. Well, so I think too, you were mentioning some of the factories. So maybe just talking a little bit more about, because I find it so fascinating that it works so well in a building with an arch and, you know, everything else, but then also in a factory.
Yeah, the key to reinforced concrete, one of the keys is that it allows for enormous windows, or what architects like to call glazing. So Albert Kahn, in effect, invents what in the early 20th century was known as the daylight factory. Previous ordinary masonry factories had to have small windows because every window you put in weakened the wall that was holding up the entire building. But with reinforced concrete, it's the concrete structure and frame that's poured before anything else that holds everything up. So this is one of the ways in which Albert Kahn helps create modern architecture. He invents the building with enormous windows. This, of course, allowed for tremendous light to come into factories at a time when electricity was undependable and very expensive. And the concrete frame also meant that you didn't need nearly as many interior columns to hold up the floors and the roof. So the floors were much more open, airy, and spacious.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, some of these things that we don't even think about, that we take for granted now.
Yeah.
By the way, the building on the far left here, the old administration building, is still standing as well.
Yes.
As part of the annex behind it. And on the far right along Manchester Avenue, those buildings are still there. I deeply regret the loss of the powerhouse in the middle with the FORD letters suspended between the smokestacks. I would kill to have that on Woodward Avenue today.
Oh.
And that old administration building is just being used for storage at this point. It would make an incredible little museum. It really could be readaptive and used. We've taken trips, me and my kids, there just to see it.
So moving once again back to the University of Michigan campus, I mean, so many amazing memories for many of us at Hill Auditorium, but maybe Michael, you can talk a little bit about the construction, and then I know Carol has some good stories about it too.
Indeed, she does. Hill Auditorium is Kahn's, I think it's his second important commission after engineering, though I may be missing one in between. It's certainly his first really beautiful building at the university. I particularly like Hill because it reminds me of some of Louis Sullivan's work in earlier decades in Chicago, and in particular his jewel box banks in small towns scattered across the Midwest. Aesthetically, what I like about Hill is the columns, the limestone column set, which looks like it's almost punched into the brick facade. And I love the decorative tile work that surrounds the column inset. I think it's a really great building. I think it's somber. I think it's sort of brooding. I really love it.
This is the
Carol,
this is the building that during COVID, I dreamt of returning to Hill Auditorium and was fearful that I would never get to go back in there. And when I did go back in there, the emotions that flooded me. But this is a building that my dad got to be present as a young person at the opening, him and his mother. There's a photograph booklet. And if you take a little magnifying glass, you can see my dad's blue eyes and his mother's blue eyes in a black and white photo. they're sitting in the front row at the opening night, and what a powerful memory to have. I spent a lot. I grew up in Hill Auditorium because my dad had tickets, and got to hear people like Leoton Price, and Yehudi Menuhin. Just what a way to be raised. And of course, Marcel Marceau was in there too. But the acoustics of the place were. My dad watched the whole thing. On opening night, they were running around putting felt up to try and absorb the sound. They had done a test of the sound. They had a person drop a pin in the center part where the sound is best on the floor. Another person was in the back row, and sure enough, you could hear that sound. They remodeled it in 2003, 2004, did an incredible job. Just something that I was so delighted that they did, really modernized it. My kids and I attended the reopening of that, and we performed that same little test, dropping a pin. The kids were like 10 and 12 when we did this. One kid would drop the pin, and one of us in the back, and sure enough, you could hear it, and we would take turns. Even an older person's ears could hear that pin being dropped in the back row. Just phenomenal. And the acoustics were done by a scientist, Hugh Talent, according to my dad. Just a wonderful building.
Definitely. So I noticed someone else is asking about the acoustics, and I mentioned I checked out a lot of books out of the library, but Michael Smith has been working on a panel about the Clements. And so I checked out his book, Designing Detroit. And one of the things that I loved in this book is all of the drawings that he has talking about the sound and how that was designed. And so anyway,
supposedly performers love to come to Hill because the reverberation or the sound between the audience and them is just very, very powerful.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. So it's definitely, and we'll talk a little bit later maybe about Clements' interactions with Kahn, but this is one of the buildings that they worked on together.
The other thing, as a kid listening to symphonies, I would get bored. So if you're a kid at Hill Auditorium, all you have to do is just count the beautiful medallion decorations on the ceiling to entertain yourself during a performance.
So we started, I mentioned that, Mr. Clements had as a regent interactions with Kahn, and it seems like there's lots of interesting back and forth between him and the regents and the president at different times about what kinds of designs to do. And so I know, Michael, this is one of the buildings you wanted to talk about, so maybe you could give us a little background.
Yeah, Burton Memorial Tower is another what I would call iconic building. It sort of looms over Ann Arbor, irrespective of its aesthetic qualities, which I think are pretty high. It has this like commanding presence in the city. In some respects, reminds me in a small way of what the World Trade Towers used to exercise over Lower Manhattan. The design that Albert Kahn builds in 1935 or 6 was an adaptation of an earlier design from the mid-20s by Eliel Saarinen, father to Eero. Eliel Saarinen was the Cranbrook designer, and he was commissioned to design a music quadrangle with the Carillon Tower. But ultimately, that never gets built. And in the mid-30s, Saarinen is completely swamped with Cranbrook. So the actual final design and construction falls to Albert Kahn, who does what he loved doing, which is to take another man's design and adapt it to his own purposes and tweak it to make it his own. I think what you can see is that the Kahn design is heavier, more massive, and if I can use these terms, more masculine than Saarinen's sort of more graceful tapering design.
Thank you. Carol, do you have some stories for us about Arlene Hatcher Graduate Library?
Oh my gosh. So I call it the grad library. For one thing, it's been a place, because it's sort of the center focus of the DIAG, a place where demonstrations are held, political rallies are held. That's one thing that building does, is give a place. I was just recently there for a Ukrainian vigil a few weeks ago. And again, that building gives just an incredible sense of awe to look at and backdrop, almost like a stage. I spent a lot of time in that building because I went to U of M, studied up there in that library, looking at the mural of peace, the mural of war. Periodically, I'll just go in there just to relax and spend time looking at that. My dad would take me in there and show me the beautiful, beautiful paintings that are on the walls, arch-shaped walls as you go up that staircase. And he watched the man as he painted those. I don't know if he watched Melchers do the paintings of peace and war. That I don't know. It's a wonderful place to get lost. I think it's one of the gems of campus. And those pine trees, it reminds me a little bit of Old Main Hospital, because Old Main Hospital also had pine trees like that. And it's just, there's no words to describe there's Old Main. Oh my gosh, wonderful.
Well, speaking of Old Main Hospital, yes, I mean, and speaking of your dad, so maybe you can tell us why Old Main was special too.
Oh, well, gosh, Old Main was where my parents met. So at U of M Hospital, my dad was a surgeon and my mom was a internal medicine doctor. I worked as a ward clerk on one of the wards. It was designed in 1923, 24, just as my dad was getting into medical school, which I think is kind of convenient. But it was a legendary, incredible modern design at the time, because the nurse could sit at the desk and monitor down the hallway the wards. You wouldn't want to do it like that these days. The wards were so large. It's just a massive building. They had to destroy the building, and it was very painful to watch my dad witness that building being destroyed and a new hospital going up. He sort of fought it, but it had to happen in terms of needing a more modern hospital. We had a small group. There was a medical student who organized a group of people to try and we wanted to save that administration part of that building, the very front part, and couldn't quite convince the regents to do the entire building. We tried to get some funding to do that, and it just did not work out. But we did manage to save that arch, and that arch is still in existence. It resides real close to the Willow Run Bomber Plant. This is an Emma Weddage lithograph that was an attempt to raise some funds, and Albert's daughter, my Aunt Rosalie, gave us that as a wedding gift. And you can't see in this terrible cell phone picture, but there's the names of all the very well-known people like Tommy Francis. My dad's name is in there. Men and women, Elizabeth Crosby, who had done incredible work in medicine at University of Michigan. It's a wonderful lithograph. Emma Weddage, great guy, real good friend of my dad. Towards the end of my dad's life, Emma Weddage and he would sketch together, and my dad actually made some sketches. They weren't real good, but he made an attempt. They also spent a lot of time stargazing. Yeah.
So one of the things that I've wondered a little bit about in terms of the poured concrete and steel structure is, does that make it harder sometimes to renovate these buildings? You know, because it makes them sturdy, but then does that pose some different kinds of problems with renovation?
I don't know precisely. I'm guessing not. One of the virtues of a reinforced concrete building is you can destroy all the walls inside pretty much and take it down to the concrete and then rebuild from within. Reinforced concrete sort of reigns supreme up until the early to mid 20s, at which point steel construction becomes much more sophisticated and stronger. Building a steel frame building was cheaper and much quicker than a reinforced concrete building. So reinforced concrete kind of disappears for a while until it comes back in the post-war era in sculptural concrete. One of the things about bouncing back momentarily to the Graduate Library, which I think is 1925, but you can see there, you know, the enormous windows that the reinforced concrete permitted. Of course, a few years later, you could have built that same building with a steel frame, and it would have had the same opportunity for massive windows.
Thank you. So we're seeing a lot of renovations and anniversaries happening in some of these buildings. And I know that the Belle Isle Conservancy has had some celebrations as well, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
So this is I always have to get confused between conservancy and conservatory. This is the Belle Isle Conservatory, which houses numerous plants, and it's part of the Belle Isle Conservancy, which also includes the aquarium. The Conservancy is a group of volunteers who has done incredible work, because when I was a nursing student in Detroit, this place was closed. The aquarium was closed. The conservatory was closed. There was nothing going on there, and they brought it back to life in about 10 years, a group of volunteers. I don't have a picture of the tiles of the ceiling, but a man by the name of Chris Meister and his wife, I walked in there with my partner Ed and look up at the ceiling, and the ceiling is this green aquamarine shining tile ceiling in an arc, sort of the color of Michael's walls back there in his room there, his house. And I burst into tears, and I had to kind of step aside. And this is something that happens to me quite often. It's that sense of awe of walking into some of these buildings and seeing these places, and just, I'm overcome with emotion. So I kind of, you know, have to explain to people. Ed would say, you know, well, she's having a moment. But Chris Meister polished each and every one of those tiles, maybe 4x4 tiles each one. After work, he left one tile up so you could see how dirty they had gotten. The other thing, more recently, they had taken down a board that's right in the entranceway to reveal these, I call them rosettes. I don't know if that's the actual word for it, Michael, and you'd have to tell me. But this is what was underneath that board. So it's going to take a tremendous amount of work to conserve these. But there's people in Detroit area and the States who can do that work. But there's definitely energy and a well. And the fish in the place are just wonderful. At the 10-year anniversary, they had a brand new creature that was introduced, and they pulled down the curtain, and here's this little tiny octopus, and his name was Ringo.
Yeah, so it's nice to see some of these cultural institutions making a comeback as well. So, oh, this was a nice close up too of Neptune. So Detroit Athletic Club is certainly a vibrant and iconic building as well. So if either of you would like to talk a little bit more about.
The Detroit Athletic Club is built in 1915. I've read that Henry Joy, who is the president of Packard Motor Company, wanted it built to get the heads of the auto companies and the auto elite out of the saloons and into a more refined setting. It's a very cool building. It's a Renaissance revival building. It looks like it could be plunked down in Florence. The swimming pool's on the 4th floor. It's an enormous iron or steel basin and is still there. And the club, of course, is thriving. It's doing very well. Among the younger people who've moved into Detroit in recent years, and many of whom have this huge enthusiasm for Albert Kahn's architecture, there's this myth going around that the Detroit police headquarters, which is about 3 blocks away on Beaubien, was designed by Kahn to resemble the DAC as a way of getting back at the DAC for excluding Jewish members. It's kind of a fun little idea. There's no basis in fact. Most of the auto titans were at one time or another clients of Kahn's. And he was, after all, the most pragmatic of architects. His line was architecture is 90% business and 10% art. And I don't think that he ever would have designed a building to tick off many of his most important clients. And the truth is, both buildings are Renaissance revival buildings, but beyond that, the surface treatment is very different. There's also the curious question of really because police headquarters, I think, is mid-20s. In the mid-20s, like Detroit's elite would be offended if a building for the police resembled their treasured athletic club. It just doesn't make sense on many different levels. By the way, Kahn was offered an honorary membership, which he graciously turned down.
Interesting. Oh, I hadn't heard those stories before.
And that story was told at our dinner table. Again, I don't know the reality of what really happened. What I didn't know about this pool, it's on that 4th floor as a result of reinforced concrete. It's one of the first swimming pools to be able to be up that high. I want to give a plug for Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation because they do a number of tours, and Ken Katz took us on a tour of the building. He's the man that does a whole lot of conservation work of the DAC, and it was a phenomenal tour. This was my favorite part because I'm a swimmer, but I also enjoyed the upper level where there was a cigar closet that I got to walk in. And DAC is a beautiful place. That's all I got on that.
Thank you.
Oh. This is another 100th birthday party happening just in January, I believe. That's my friend Grace Shackman, who's been a mentor to me, and I hope she's here today. This is Temple Bethel that has been sold to a group called the Bethel Community Transformation Center. They had a wonderful party, and they had this young man. We wanted to see the front of the building. They're having us enter by the side entrance, and we asked if we could go there, and we started to take off, and he said, I have to come with you. So he was giving us protection as we walked to the front of the building, because it is in a pretty interesting part of Detroit. He didn't want 2 little old women having any difficulty. But the party was phenomenal because they brought together the Jewish community, the Christian community, in an effort to really create a space, a community center where they're going to have therapy services, religious services, food access, you name it. They're going to try to do it. I'm really impressed with what they're doing. It's worth taking a look at their plan. They certainly are trying to raise funds because they have big ambitions, including use of solar energy. It's very creative. We're trying to talk about how to reuse these buildings, and it's very difficult. I've been there 3 times. The first time I went, we went into the main part of the church, not the church, the temple, and their ceiling was falling down, and so the dirt was on the floor. This last time I went there, they'd done their very best to clean things up a little bit better. The most beautiful murals are out there, done by, I always forget his name. Michael, what's his name? Do you know?
No.
Oh, beautiful. Well worth the trip. It'll come to me. Phenomenal murals. They also had people who had been confirmed in that temple stand up, and there was a number of people who stood up. Beautiful building with a whole lot of potential.
Kahn ends up building both temples Bethel in the city of Detroit. He built the one that we know as the Bonstell Theater at Wayne State University, and I think it was 1903. And then this is early to mid-20s. If you think that this Temple Bethel, which is, way up Woodward, just south of Highland Park, if you think it bears a glancing resemblance to the Lincoln Memorial, you might be right. When Kahn won the one-year traveling fellowship in 1891 to tour Europe and sketch for a year, he bumped into a young architect in Florence who was much wealthier than he was and much better educated in formal terms. Albert Kahn never attended school once he landed in the United States at age 12. He's one of the last of the generations of architects who were trained entirely through the apprentice system, and he apprenticed with the Detroit firm Mason and Rice. In any case, this younger architect ends up traveling with Albert Kahn. That was Henry Bacon, who some 25 or 30 years later designs the Lincoln Memorial. The two were friends and kept in touch, and I always have liked to think that this is sort of Kahn's homage to Henry Bacon.
Thank you. It's fun to hear that part of the story. So maybe I know that, there's various aesthetics over the years that transformed Kahn's designs, but also just the, sort of popular thoughts of the day. And I know that there's a bit of a story about Angel Hall and how Kahn had to rethink it a little bit.
Yeah, so in the early 1920s, there was sort of a to-do raised by snooty alumni and snooty faculty. And the head of engineering wrote the president of the university a letter arguing that the buildings at the University of Michigan looked like factories. And here again, think of like the Graduate Library, brick building with enormous windows, which bore some resemblance to Kahn's auto factories, or Natural Sciences, which also has that look. This dean of engineering said that he knew a family who sent their son to Princeton because it has beautiful buildings. And if the University of Michigan had beautiful buildings, they would have sent him here. He listed some 12 buildings that he thought were deplorable and unattractive, including engineering. All but one of them were Albert Kahn buildings. So the president came to Albert Kahn and said, Albert, just love your buildings. Think you're doing great work. Can you please throw up something fancy to shut these people up? I don't know in the timeline whether that's why Clements Library ends up being a Renaissance revival building of great beauty. I think it's actually the prettiest of Kahn's work. But I do know that with Angel Hall was going to be fronted in brick. And I don't know if the original design called for the tremendous Doric columns. But Kahn very politely redesigned it. He gave the regents actually 3 options, and they chose the fanciest design. If you walk around the back, though, where you can see parts of the wings that haven't been covered by newer buildings, you can see the brick treatment that he had originally intended for Angel Hall. By the way, Angel Hall was meant to be a, quote, gateway to the university. I've never quite understood that, since gateway implies you walk through something to enter a new space. But in any event, it was meant to be this very important sort of focal point for the university.
Thank you. We've talked a bit about how many buildings he created on campus and his relationship with Mr. Clements, because Mr. Clements was one of the Committee of 5, which made so many decisions about the construction on campus. So do you have any other stories about that committee or that relationship that you can tell us?
About the only thing I know is that Clements was also, I think, a regent or trustee at the university. He and Kahn were friends. Kahn built Clements's home in Bay City. And when Clements died, and I can't remember if that was the 20s or the 30s.
30s.
Thank you. Kahn went to the funeral and was involved in a car accident and slightly injured, which turned up the next day in a small item in the Detroit News.
So
this, by the way, is based on a Renaissance casino outside Florence, the name of which I'm blanking on right now. I've looked at pictures of the casino, and I think had one in my book. I think that Clements is a more elegant and sort of lighter interpretation of the form. I think it's just a gorgeous building.
Thank you. Well, and that same casino, I think you mentioned, and I think I've seen other people talk about it too, how there are other buildings based on it, and that Kahn and Clements were sort of traveling in those same circles.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Carol, I know that there's some family lore about the Clements building.
So my dad would drive me, and he would literally stop on South U in front of the building and say, "This is my dad's favorite building." Other than that, I know that, should we talk about where Clements didn't let Kahn know about the mistake?
Oh, that's a great story
I
too.
had never heard that before. So in the portico, one of the medallions was not correct. They put in some kind of Scottish critters rather than, I think it was supposed to be George Washington.
George Washington's crest. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, his crest. Okay, excuse me. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So
apparently the mistake is alleged because the person who was going to take the sketch that Kahn had asked for out of a book, the pages may have flipped, and he or she used a different page for the design. And the museum director realized it, and Clements realized it, but he never wanted to let Kahn know, and he went to his grave, never revealing that a mistake had been made because he didn't want to hurt Kahn's feelings. I think it's really interesting as a friend, very kind. But I would really encourage people to read what are written, the words that are written on the building. They're very, very inspiring words.
Other thing I would say aesthetically about the building is I've always regretted that the enormous addition to the graduate library looms above it. There are cases where a huge building behind a smaller building helps frame the smaller building. But in this case, I don't think it does. I think it kind of overpowers Clements and to some extent hides it, because you tend to look up at the tremendous brick building looming above it.
Yeah, yeah.
If they had asked me, but nobody ever did.
They didn't. Can I read the words? Oh, go ahead.
Right. You are not the only one who has said that and who thinks that way, for sure. And I know that when we're taking photos of the building, we're always trying, that's why it's usually so zoomed in, because you're trying to show it without that looming behind it.
Can I read the words? Sure. Can I read the words? So on the east window, the words are, tradition fades, but the written record remains ever fresh. And on the west window, in darkness dwells the people which know not its anal, which know its annals not. It's a little bit difficult to say. It's older English. Beautiful, beautiful words. Very inspiring. It was always a closed building in my generation. I never went in there as a student. It's only recently that I've been allowed in. And the building interior takes my breath away. Angela took me in there, Ann took me in there just recently, and the lights weren't on. And it's still, my breath was taken away at the inner beauty of the building. Just phenomenal.
And Clements, by the way, houses a collection of rare Americana, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And was that Clements's personal collection?
The original collection, yes, was donated by Mr. Clements. But then one of the things he wanted to be sure of is that we continued to collect and continued to build that collection. So we do. And my understanding is one of the good things about a design like this is that it's intended to be fireproof because of the way it's designed.
Yep.
I mean, that's one of the other benefits of the concrete construction, right?
Yeah. And in fact, in around the turn of the century, when reinforced concrete being used a great deal was still a new concept, hotels used to, in their newspaper advertisements, would sometimes say reinforced concrete fireproof construction.
Right. So that's one of the other benefits that Mr. Clements, I think, saw in this. Now, let's see. I know we're getting short on time, but I will just mention, I loved Carol's story about another way to see some work that your grandfather did.
So this would be the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. So according to documentation from the Grand Hotel, the historian has documented that Albert Kahn, as a draftsman, helped draft the design of the porch. My dad at the dinner table would say, when I was a kid camping across from on the Straits, I could look over at the Grand Hotel, and that's what I would see, were the lights of the porch, and I would ever so proud. Oh, that's a beautiful picture. Oh my gosh. But there is a swim around Mackinac Island, and I've done it twice. It's a wonderful swim, and there's nothing like getting in that Lake Huron water and then swimming past with the Grand Hotel up above and onward. It's a long ways around the island, but it's worth every little penny. I'm gonna go again this summer with a group of women. I'm not gonna do the whole thing this year, but it's just Lake Huron and Mackinac Island and the Grand Hotel are just a wonderful thing for the state of Michigan.
Definitely. And we have to give a shout out to your partner, Ed, for all the places you drag him
Yeah,
to
he
look at
follows
these
me
things.
around. Michael knows Ed. This is our dog, Mickey, but Ed Conley follows me on these travels. I asked him this morning as he was going to Jiffy to work, I said, what was your favorite building that we went to visit? And he said the Pierce Aero Plant in Buffalo, New York.
Ah,
Because he's from Buffalo. That's another. There are buildings around the world that have had influence of Albert Kahn.
yeah.
Google any city you go in, Google Albert Kahn, you'll find something.
And Albert Kahn also during World War II designed a number of the bases and the buildings on the bases in the Pacific Islands that were used as part of the war effort. And in fact, some people have accused him of kind of creating the military-industrial complex, although frankly, in the context of World War II, you would have to say everything he designed and built was completely justified.
Yeah.
Well, this
There's the
has
cat.
Yes.
What's the cat's name, Michael?
George. He likes grooming me. It's a little embarrassing.
Oh, God.
We have lots of questions in the Q&A section.
Oh, good.
And
Fantastic.
I've learned so much, but I'm sure I'll learn even more during those questions. Really quickly, though, before we get to those, I just want to do a couple of housekeeping items and let people know that our current exhibit is a student-curated exhibit called Family Secrets, Uncovering Identity in 19th Century America. And it's open for viewing on Mondays and Fridays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So we hope if you're in the area that you'll come see that. This, there's another view of the exhibit and the beautiful room. This Sunday, in collaboration with our friends at the Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation, we are hosting an event that will include a special pop-up exhibit of Kahn's work, as well as the opportunity to tour the Clements and see that curated exhibit as well. So we invite you to join us at the Clements from 2 to 4 p.m. on Sunday. And just a quick shout out for the fact that we're celebrating the Clements Library's centennial year this year, and we have a lot of events coming up. In March, next week, we have the John Shai Memorial Reception and Lecture. Fred Anderson is the featured speaker, so if you're able to attend, we'd love to see you. And as well, of course, we'll continue the Bookworm every month. There's a public tour in April. And please watch your email for a lot more information about the Centennial Gala, or take a look at the link that we provide. We're really excited to celebrate in a big way. And save the date for June 15th, which is the day of the library dedication, and we'll have a really fun community event that day with an ice cream social. And thank you once again to Tony Morrell for sponsoring today's episode of the Bookworm in honor of Corey Bell Root. We really appreciate that. And if you're interested in sponsoring a future episode of the Bookworm, you can always talk to me or Ann Bennington-Helber. All right. And now on to the questions. All right, let's see. Well, we have a couple that have already been answered. Let's see. Jeff Davis is asking, is there a present day architectural firm that is linked to Kahn's original firm? It's an easy.
Carol?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Albert Kahn Associates continues. Is that on the webpage? Do we have that? Yes, definitely. They're active and doing work worldwide.
Indeed. So that's an easy question to answer. And Ann Cassidy is wondering, did Kahn use limestone from Indiana in Ann Arbor and Detroit?
Good question. I think so, but I don't know for sure. But it seems to me I ran across that phrase, Indiana limestone, in a couple of the earlier biographies of Albert Kahn. By the way, the two earlier biographies, which are much more academic than mine, were also very good. Designing for Industry by Grant Hildebrand and Albert Kahn, Architect of Ford, by an Italian name whose last name is Bucci, B-U-C-C-I, who's the Dean of Architecture at Milan Polytechnic University in Italy.
And there is an upcoming book that is going to be coming of the sketches of Albert Kahn from the University of Michigan Art Museum, done by Dale Carlson. That's in the planning and discussion mode, I believe.
Dale Carlson has done a number of great books on local architecture and art. He's worth looking up.
Yes.
As is Michael
that's
Smith.
wonderful.
Oh, Michael Smith, absolutely. Yes. Michael Smith wrote an incredible article on Albert Kahn, the Kahn family father, who was a rabbi, and gave me information I had never heard of about how intelligent he was as a rabbi, how wise he was. It was very eye-opening for me. I'm really grateful he did that. That was in the Jewish Historical Society, I want to say newsletter.
It's interesting too, Albert Kahn was on the board of Temple Beth El for most of his life. But while his father was a rabbi, there's little indication that Kahn was religious at all. His affiliations seemed to be more historic and cultural. Am I right there, Carol?
Yes, that's my understanding. I think his religion was music and arts. There's a description, even my dad described this, but my Aunt Rosalie described this, where he would sit in a chair. He would go home from work, sit in his study and put on music, and he would literally lay back and open his mouth and drink in the music. That was a part of his religion. As a young man, he could have been a concert pianist, but he couldn't support himself. He moved to the States from Germany and Luxembourg before developing those skills as a pianist, but he always loved music. I think that was his religious practice, and architecture and art.
Nice.
He had an amazing sense of humor also.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Courtney asks a good question that's related to the sketches that we were talking about, wondering about Kahn's philosophy about the use of ornament.
He was all in favor of it, pretty much. Although one of the things that distinguished his early auto factories was that they, by and large, almost entirely lacked ornament, which was kind of a break with tradition. And that was another thing that thrilled the young radical modernists in Europe, for whom ornamentation was a great sin. But in his commercial buildings and his religious and academic buildings, there's a lot of lovely ornamentation. I'm particularly fond of the medallions or sort of square placards on the outside of Angel Hall.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we have not mentioned is the library at Lawrence Tech University. Lawrence Tech has done a tremendous amount to bring back history and research into Albert Kahn. Albert's library is at Lawrence Tech, and in that library there are tremendous books on decoration and architecture and history. It's a phenomenal collection. I don't know if it's something that you can access. It probably is if you've got a good reason. It's phenomenal. It actually has the furniture in it and the original woodwork bookshelves. It's you can't, call Lawrence Tech up and see if you can go visit. That would be my suggestion. Or let's organize a visit.
And Lawrence Tech also, I think once a year, usually has a seminar on Kahn that I think is open to the public.
That stopped a while ago.
Ah.
Yeah, they had a retirement, and I think that has been discontinued.
Pity.
I think Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation kind of picked up the baton.
Yeah, and the Legacy Foundation does splendid work.
Yeah, absolutely. Did we answer the question?
I think so. I mean, there is, I can't think of the, I have it somewhere, but the, there's a book about Balducci with lots of photos of ornamentation on the buildings in Detroit, which many of which are Kahn buildings, which is kind of a cool book.
Yeah. Jeff Morrison is the person who does beautiful photographs. Yeah, he's another person who's a resource. Beautiful book on the sculptures. The other person we should mention would be Claire Zimmerman, because she's a University of Michigan architectural historian who's done a tremendous amount of work, started the first U of M course in Albert Kahn, and really has done some incredible work in exhibitions. She tried to do a trip with her students to former Soviet Union and wasn't able to do it. It became, I don't remember what year it was, but it ended up being too dangerous. They went to Italy instead.
Claire, who's brilliant and also a complete scream, knows more about Albert Kahn than probably anyone else on planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. I love what she says, though. She'll say things like, I forgot what I knew, because there's so much information. And when she says that, I feel so much better. I forgot that I actually knew that.
And she organized curated a really interesting exhibition at the University of Michigan Museum of Art, I don't know, 5 years ago, on construction photographs of buildings by Albert Kahn in process. That was just dynamite.
Yeah, those are available through the Bentley. They'd have to take photos every week of the building project. So each building was being documented in black and white photos. I don't know what the reasoning was, but historically, it's a tremendous record of construction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you just mentioned that his Albert Kahn's books, his library, is at Lawrence Tech. And so I noticed that Pamela was asking about that. So that answers part of her question, but also wondering, Michael, what the chief sources were for your book when you were researching.
I was lucky in a way because there were 2 previous biographies, which at least sort of gives you a rough roadmap. So I read both the Grant Hildebrand and the Federico Bucci biographies. And then it was mostly, archival research at the Bentley Historical Library, which is where where practically everything from Albert Kahn Associates is housed in a huge collection. And at the Archives of American Art, which is part of the Smithsonian in DC, they have the donations from Kahn's family. And that's also just a marvelous collection, a little more personal and intimate. One of the things I found there, and Carol has gone through that collection extensively as well, but was the guest register from Albert and Ernestine Kahn's small mansion on Mack Avenue at John R., I believe, now the National Urban League headquarters in Detroit. And in there's a signature, Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. It was a little bit like bumping into history. And also the Detroit Institute of Arts has a collection of Albert Kahn's stuff. Cranbrook had a little, so I was kind of all over the place. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo were a tremendous surprise. The internet is something that's really helped make this research more accessible, at least to myself. And I was at work one night and I Googled Albert Kahn. And all of a sudden this photograph of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera popped up with Albert. And it was like, oh my gosh, I knew nothing about their connection. But they attended a birthday party for my dad when my dad turned some 30s out at the home at Walnut Lake. Oh my gosh, you got the photo. Yeah. Usually that photo gets cut out. Albert gets cut out for some reason. I don't quite know why that is. But there's also family lore. We really do believe that Albert and my dad are in the Diego Rivera murals at the DIA. We can point them out to you. There's also a reproduction of one of them on a mural near the bus stop here in the AATA bus stop. Michael would probably argue that Albert Kahn helped save the Detroit frescoes of Diego Rivera.
The argument goes like this. So when a few weeks before the frescoes had their public unveiling, a group of conservative clergy came to visit, invited by a young volunteer public relations guy named George Perot, whom anyone over 50 will remember had a TV show on adventure travel on local Detroit TV for years and years and years. Perot brought these clergymen in part because he had a feeling they would be ticked off by the vaccination panel, which is one of these smaller panels up high by the ceiling, which shows a doctor and a nurse administering a vaccine to a little blonde baby boy. What offended them was that the vaccination panel is clearly based on Renaissance depictions of the Holy Family. So the doctor is Joseph and the mother and the nurse, of course, is Mary. And in the background are three scientists bent over microscopes, and they are the three wise men. So there was a huge hue and cry, and a number of clergymen, the Episcopal bishop, Father Coughlin, all sorts of people denounced the vaccination panel as blasphemous and anti-Christian. Go figure. And there was a hue and cry to have the murals removed. The Detroit City Council, one councilman voted or proposed that they should be washed off the walls, which doesn't work with tempera, of course, because it's painted on wet plaster, so the colors actually sink in. Trying to scrub the color off won't get you anywhere. But there was this big controversy. Ultimately, of course, the decision about whether they should be removed or kept came down to Edsel Ford because he had paid for them, as well as paying most of the salaries to DIA employees during the Depression. So Albert Kahn gave an interview to my old newspaper, the Detroit News, the day of the big public unveiling. And he said basically that anyone who didn't recognize that Mr. Rivera had put Detroit on the world artistic map was a dolt. He could be a little sharp sometime in his language. He didn't precisely use that. And he predicted that in decades hence, the Detroit Institute of Arts will become a point of artistic pilgrimage for art lovers worldwide. And that has certainly come true. So I like to think, although there's no documentary proof for this, Edsel Ford couldn't stand up to his father, Henry. I don't think he was very good at standing up to Blue Book Detroit and Society Titans. But Albert gives this interview where he defends the murals full force. And then about 6 weeks later, Edsel Ford came out and said that he felt Mr. Rivera had done very well by Detroit history. And that ended the brouhaha.
I have often wondered what a conversation would have been like between my grandmother, Ernestine Krolik Kahn, and Frida Kahlo. Two very different women, but both in love with art.
Well, that sounds like a historic fiction project waiting for you to write.
I'll get right on that.
We have several questions relating to the building practices at U of M during Albert Kahn's time. Jeff is wondering if the buildings had to be publicly bid for construction, or was Albert Kahn able to select his own contractor? And Barbara's asking, why were Kahn Associates awarded so many commissions?
Albert Kahn was sort of, I don't remember the precise title, but he was sort of the university architect for a number of years. And so I think the regents had made the decision that we like this guy. I'm sure one of the things that they loved about him is Albert Kahn almost always brought his projects in under budget and ahead of time.
Yes.
He was his firm was incredibly reliable. As to bidding out for contractors, I don't know. My guess is he probably had a favored contractor whom he felt did really good, efficient work. But I don't know whether, in fact, things were bid out like that.
Do we have any idea how many buildings he designed during his career?
The figure 2,000 pops up, and I think that's in the Metro Detroit area. I don't know worldwide. There are all sorts of huge figures that get bandied about, but he was one of the most prolific architects in history, really. And again, I mean, he had an enormous firm, especially in the 30s and 40s, so was able to grind stuff out at a remarkable pace. He's a tremendous contrast to Frank Lloyd Wright, who actually produced relatively few buildings.
You could spend an entire summer in Michigan going around looking at Albert Kahn buildings, Battle Creek, Jackson, Ann Arbor, Detroit, Flint. There's some things up in the UP. Certainly, then if we jump over to Canada, Windsor, Michael and I and Ed have gone to Williston Manor, and several buildings that have been built over in the Windsor. What is the name of the town?
Walkerville.
Walkerville. Oh, phenomenal. And they've done a beautiful job of developing a little historical booklet about Walkerville, the buildings there.
Yeah, he also designed the Wabeek commercial building at Maple and Old Woodward in downtown Birmingham.
Mm-hmm. There's fraternities in Ann Arbor. There's residences in Ann Arbor that you wouldn't even think were Albert Kahn's. My elementary school next door, a friend lived there. John Zweifler lived there. That was an Albert Kahn building. I had no idea for years.
He also built a number of significant big houses and mansions in Indian Village, the Boston Medicine Historic District, as well as Grosse Pointe.
Bernie Siegel House. It's unbelievable what he did. Unbelievable. Yeah. Cambridge Road in Ann Arbor currently on the market. Ah, okay. What's the price? Cambridge. Interesting. A lot.
Corey's asking a little bit more about the Belle Isle Conservatory that's being renovated. Just confirming that was also designed by Kahn along with the aquarium. And is Kahn Associates involved in any of the current renovations?
I'm sure they are, but I don't know. I know they've done a lot of consulting on a lot of these renovations.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they'll go to the Bentley to get the original prints if they're there or at the firm. the Bentley's been such a great preserve. There's a fellow who, when the firm was moving to a new building in Detroit in the last few years, they had to move all the prints that were down in the basement of the building because the building was in really not good, or the basement wasn't in good condition. The prints weren't being kept real well. And he, on the weekends, loaded them up in his truck and took them over to the other building just to preserve them and get them in a safer place. Don Bowman, his name is phenomenal. The devotion that this family has gotten from people working there is phenomenal. There's a Facebook page. I can't remember if it's the Kahn, the former employees. I don't remember the name of it. The Kahn something. Kahn, what is it? I don't know. We'd have to ask Heidi Faunus what it is, but they gather, and I think it'd be a wonderful place to work.
Yeah, I've also enjoyed seeing some of the old photos. The
Facebook page is called the Ex-Cons.
Nice.
So they must be retired.
Speaking of family stories, Cheryl is mentioning, I enjoy that she's sharing this, that her father was a building contractor and she always visited the sites that he was working on, and that he loved it, that he loved building and it was the focus of his life. And so she's just asking us a little bit about if there's other family memories included at the Clements. And the answer is yes. It's hard to know how to organize these kinds of things because they do indeed add to the story. But yes, we do have family memories from relatives of Mr. Clements as well as relatives of the earlier directors.
Nice.
And then along the lines of what you were just talking about with the ex-cons, Kristen is asking about mentoring and training. Did Kahn's firm and did he sort of spin off other noted architects?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. A lot of the buildings have Kahn's name on it, but they were done with other architects. He didn't do these projects all by himself. Numerous other people were involved.
One of the famous architects, who's the subject of Michael Smith's book, Rowland, worked for Kahn for a number of years, actually on 2 different occasions. And there's sort of a parade of architects who end up becoming very big in Detroit, who pass through Albert Kahn Associates. And one of the biographers, Grant Hildebrand, worked at Kahn Associates in the early 1960s before going out to become a professor of architecture at the University of Washington.
Thank you. Kristen's wondering if the old economics building on the Diag, the one that burned to the ground, influenced why the Hatcher Library and Sciences buildings were red bricked.
I'm not sure. Carol, do you know?
No, I don't know. And I don't know what came first, if the brick buildings came first or the economics. That's part of the problem.
The economics building burned down in the 70s, didn't it?
Yeah, it was later.
I mean, it seems to me it burned down one summer when I was living in Ann Arbor. So the brick buildings around it are well, I don't know if they're earlier, but they certainly precede the fire. I don't know when the economics building, which is, I recall, was sort of like an Italianate little brick house, not very big.
You have to look it up.
That sat in front of where the undergraduate library is now.
Kristen Cabral.
Right. I know where it is, but I don't really know where it was, but I don't really know what it lolooked like. So
yeah, I think it was sort of plunked in the middle of campus. It was sort of odd and charming.
It was, as you walked on the Diag, it was on the corner, or not on the corner, but just to the side. Do you have a picture? It doesn't look like what I'm remembering. Huh. But So many buildings, so little time.
I know. And it is, yeah, it is.
Yes, it was across from the ugly. Yes.
Yeah.
To think about how things were influenced and yeah, what happened. So there are a couple other things in the questions that other people answered. So thank you for some of that good information. And thank you both for sharing all of your knowledge and your stories. This has been really fun. And I know that I've enjoyed getting to know Albert Kahn more through both of you. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The questions are wonderful.
Well, and I think the attendees too get asked such wonderful questions. So thank you everyone for joining us on a Friday morning, and have a great weekend. Bye.